Hey, it's Scott Mason, and welcome to my first audio book review here on freespeechmonster.com. I know Brad posted one. He wrote it. He's the writer. I'm the radio guy, so it makes sense that I would do mine in audio form. But he did one on Judge Napolitano's Constitutional Chaos earlier, so if you haven't read that, you should. I'm going to do kind of a two-for-one thing because I just finished reading both of John Stossel's books, and John Stossel was a huge influence on me. I remember watching him when I was, I think, a senior in high school. I saw one of his specials on ABC, and I really found myself agreeing with a lot of the things he was saying. It really helped form my thoughts on libertarianism and actually helped me find Reason magazine too, so I'm grateful to him for that. But his two books are really interesting. The first one came out in 2004, and it's called Give Me a Break, which was the name of his segment on 2020, and the subtitle is How I Exposed Hucksters, Cheats, and Scam Artists and Became the Scourge of the Liberal Media. And it's 15 chapters long. It's a little under 300 pages, which I like because I've always said that if you're writing a book and you can't make your point in under 300 pages, it's like a guy who does a movie that's over 2 hours. Most of the time it's just unnecessary. One of the main themes is he talks about his transformation from when he was a consumer reporter, thinking that every business on the planet was out to rip us off, the government needed to protect us from them, and he was just this great consumer reporter with the lawyers getting the bad guys, and how he turned from that into basically a free market advocate. And he talks about how most of the regulations that were passed, he started to realize were not really hurting the scam artists, they were just hurting a lot of honest businesses that were just trying to make money. He also tells a story about when he had that epiphany and went from consumer reporter to free market advocate, how a lot of colleagues in the media would no longer talk to him. They gave him dirty looks, and his old allies like Ralph Nader just completely disowned him and started calling him lovely names like corporate hack. And there are a lot of good stories to that end. He tells a lot about how the media in particular, and how he did this for a while, will scare people to death about risks without really putting it in perspective. In other words, he'll explain how, if you do a story about airplanes and get all bent out of shape about one airplane crash that really, listen, accidents can happen. You scare more people into driving, and if you drive, you have a much greater chance of dying than you do in a plane, statistically. So just things like that, little things like, a producer came to him with, he wanted to do a story on Bic lighters exploding in people's pockets, and 4 or 5 people a year die from that, and he was saying how plastic bags kill more people than that, and the trial lawyers really play into it, and the media just kind of tag teams with the trial lawyers and take them at face value. There's a lot in here too about who games the system. He talks about the lawyers. Boy, does he hate trial lawyers, let me tell you. I guess part of the reason is because he got sued a bunch of times, and I can only imagine most of them seem to have been frivolous lawsuits. He also talks about welfare for the poor and welfare for the rich, which he even includes himself. Tells an interesting story about how he used to own a beach house on property that was really risky, and the federal government offered him flood insurance at a very cheap rate, which he thought was silly, but he was obviously going to take advantage of it. And then he jokes about how, when his house got washed away, we all paid for it with federal flood insurance. So he even admits himself that he gamed the system because it was there for him. Overall, it's a really good book. I highly recommend it, but his second book I think is even better. It's called Myths, Lies, and Downright Stupidity, and the subtitle is Get Out the Shovel, Why Everything You Know is Wrong. There's a bunch of chapters in here. This one also is just under 300 pages. I have this one in paperback. The other one I actually have in hardcover. He takes some shots at the media again. A lot of gender myths that he debunks. Title IX, he talks about how that doesn't really help women, and all it really does is hurt men. He talks about how everybody loves to bash business, but the truth of the matter is most of the bad things that business can get away with is because of government, which goes along the lines of corporatism. Bad government programs are a big problem that he talks about. His chapter on schools is actually excellent. It talks about all these myths about how the public school system, they claim they just need more money, and yet the more we spend, the worse the results are. He talks about how charter schools have done better, and there's all types of stories about how it's nearly impossible to fire public school teachers too. He also debunks a bunch of myths, including the one about class size. Over the past few years, we've really declined in average class size, and yet the results haven't been any better. He talks about consumer cons. He goes off on the lawyers again, which, that's a theme with John Stossel. Boy, does he hate lawyers. I'm serious. He debunks a lot of the mentalists and psychics and stuff like that, which I've always enjoyed. Guys like James Randi, who have made it more or less their life's work to debunk those frauds, and he goes through all the different ways that they get their scams in. Different health stuff, like for instance, eating organic is actually not any healthier than eating regular. It's just something that people do to make themselves feel like they're eating healthier, and so on and so forth. Another interesting one that I like was he debunked the myth that if you eat late, that's somehow worse than eating early. The main thing really is that people that eat later tend to eat worse foods like ice cream and stuff like that, and they tend to gorge at night. And that's really why people tend to gain more weight eating at night, not because they're eating at night. Talks about parenting and certain myths. He actually quotes Drew Bledsoe, the former New England Patriots quarterback. His father, Mac, is a big parenting guy, so he appears in here. It's a really good book. Both books are very well researched, and if you're familiar with Stossel's work on ABC, you've probably seen a lot of this or heard a lot of this before, but it's cool to have it all in one place. And another thing that's great is, as Brad was saying about Judge Napolitano's book, all the stuff he says is very easy to understand. He knows how to boil this down into common sense language that's not boring either. It's easy to understand and it's not boring, which is huge. Both books very enjoyable. I highly recommend them, and there's a reason that they were both New York Times bestsellers. So I'm not going to do a star rating, but what I will say is if you see these on Amazon, and I think you can get them used in pretty good condition for a good price, they'd both make great additions to any collection.